Tantra is a universe story. Before it's anything, Tantra is addressing the question of where are we? And then Tantra says, now that we know where we are, the who participates in the where. That's who I am is I don't live in it, it lives in me. Major Tantric principle. I don't just live in an intimate universe. The intimate universe lives in me. Right? And now that I know where I am and where we are, now I know, okay, who am I? Who are we? So we live in a Tantric universe, and the Tantric universe is a universe animated by Eros Valley. There's a currency of Eros. Now, the nature of that currency of Eros is conversation. What is one mountain, many baths? Right? Who are we? Right? What are we? You know, if I can tell you a story for a second and maybe set the frame, and then David will read our code. But what's this all about? What are we doing here? What are we doing here? So if I can tell you just a little story for a second, just a little bit of a personal story just for a second. I was doing a podcast with Jim Rutt, who's a wonderful man, and Zach Stein the other day, just 2 days ago. Jim was the founder of the Santa Fe Institute, and we were talking about complexity science and how we actually see it just did that. So I want to tell you a story if I can, just to set it did that, just to set our intention. So I have a fantastic kids. I have a son, Zion, with a great mom, Mariana, who's 14. And I have 2 sons who are both in Israel, and a daughter in Israel, Rachel. And my daughter, who's a great person, and I don't want to invade her world and her private world, so I won't say her last name, but she's a great person and doing just great things. And I was watching a piece that she did with her husband, and they were talking about Israel, and they were representing Israel beautifully. They did a good job in this very, very insanely painful moment, right, in Gaza and Israel, where the level of pain and the level of distortion is unimaginable. And they just did a very deep and profoundly human and gorgeous job of just explaining what was happening, explaining the pain, explaining the complexity, explaining the, just everything that was going on. And I was watching them, and I was just moved by the clarity of their lives, right? Not easy lives, and not lives that I know well, as for lots of reasons, but clarity, right? And what they were doing was clear. The cause was clear. Does that make sense? It's like, oh, this needs to be done. We're doing it. We're standing for this. We're pouring our lives into it. It's clear. And there's a very wonderful gift in clarity of cause. Who gets that? Who gets what we're talking about now? When you're standing for a clear cause. Do you remember that movie? What was it called? 3 Days of the Condor. And it was Robert Redford. And it turns out that he works for the intelligence agency, the CIA. And it turns out that he comes in one day to his brownstone in Manhattan, and his entire division, the 5-6 people he works with, have been killed. And as the movie unfolds, we get to the end of the movie, it turns out that the head of the CIA had them killed for some complex realpolitik reason that he somehow thought needed to be done. And when Redford finally breaks the mystery and breaks the code and realizes that this person that he had valorized is the source of this, heinous, terrible deed of these multiple murders. And he has them in his gun sights. And they're having this, intense conversation. I don't remember if Redford kills him in the next scene or not. He says to him, "So you missed the war, don't you?" Right? Because this head of the CIA had kind of come to his greatness in World War II. He says, "You missed the war, don't you? You miss all the killing in the war," and something like that. And the head of the CIA, who's the villain, he says, "No, I don't miss the killing. I miss the clarity." Does everyone get? I missed the clarity, meaning I knew who the good guys were. I knew who the bad guys were. It was clear. I missed the clarity. And there's something very beautiful and something very important about clarity. Not a fundamentalist clarity. We're going to talk about this later today, but a clarity that embraces all the uncertainties, but then emerges at a clarity, right? And so when you're fighting in World War II against a clear enemy, you have clarity, right? When you're fighting against a death cult, you have clarity. You don't have clarity about the methods, right? What do you do? How do you fight? It is an unimaginably painful and heartrending and beyond problematic. Do you bomb a German city when you're going to kill women and children? And not all of those women and children supported Hitler. Do you bomb the city or don't you? That is an unimaginably painful question. An unimaginably painful question. How do I be both a fighter and a humanitarian? And I need to be both. That's an unimaginably painful question. And as I watched, this particular clip of my daughter and son-in-law, right? They had clarity. They were embracing uncertainty, but they what they were doing was clear. It needed to be done. And I was both proud of them. I also understood very clearly it was theirs to do. In a different lifetime, it's something I might have done. It's not mine to do, it's theirs to do. In this lifetime, that's theirs to do. So that's the second piece of clarity we get. Like, what's mine to do? So one is I got, wow, you guys are doing great. Like really well, like crazy proud of you. Not that you need me to be proud of you, but I was proud of you anyways. Two, it's yours, clarity. I felt the joy of clarity. Three, I felt my own clarity, right? It was a painful clarity, but a clarity which is, this is not mine to do. This is yours to do. You need to be doing this, right? When you can recognize someone else's unique self, right? So clarity holds, right? Holds the uncertainty, and then it reaches for a clarity. And I'll talk more about that paradox later. But what I want to get to is, what is one mountain? Like, what are we doing here? What is our clarity? What are we articulating? So who are we? So I want to get it very, very clear, right? We're in a meta-crisis. It's a meta-crisis, which is a menu of crises. It's a polycrisis. Every one of the crises leads to a form of existential risk. And existential risk means that for the first time in history, we have risk to our essential existence. Humanity, qua humanity, may not continue. But not just humanity, right? Our essential existence, our includes not only human beings, it includes the entire world of life, and all of life, right? And all of the embodied reality of planet Earth as we know it, right? This global reality, this planetary reality could cease to exist. Humanity could cease to exist. But two, we face the potential, not just death of our humanity, existential risk to our very physical existence, but existence in the existential sense, which talked about existence before essence. And existence before essence means the quality of my existence, the interiority of my existence, not the death of humanity qua physical humanity, but the potential death of our humanity. That is what we're facing. Now, to respond to that, what we've understood is that only an evolutionary emergence can respond to that level of crisis. Does that make sense? Only a new level of evolutionary emergence, the emergence of something new, And particularly something, I don't mean a new technology, not new infrastructure that checks bioweapons in the wastewater in order to save us from rogue terrorist threats. That's really important, but that's not what I mean. By a new emergent, I mean not just a new form of regulating AI, which would be incredibly important, which would be a form of new social structure. We actually need a new superstructure, if I can borrow that term from Manfred Harris. And a new superstructure means what we would call a new story of value, which is a cosmic story of value in which we participate, in which the personal and the cosmic is one. And the new story of value is the only thing that can birth a new human and a new humanity. And that new human and that new humanity has the capacity to respond to the meta crisis, because the meta crisis is not one bad actor. It's not a villain. It's very easy to focus on villains. Whoever you choose as your villain, whoever your demon is, choose your demon. And there are villains, right? There are villains, and there are people that should be villainized, right? Right? In other words, Hitler was a villain. There are villains. There are bad actors, right? Clearly, Pol Pot was a bad actor, right? Sinwar was a bad actor. Now, people we disagree with, we can disagree with radically, right? With people, but they're not bad actors, right? There's a difference between, right? But we have bad actors. You have evil actors. But that's not where the meta crisis is going to come from. The meta crisis is, the core of the meta crisis is not three bad actors. The core of the meta crisis is a systemic system, right? What one writer called, 15, 20 years ago, Moloch, right? And Moloch is a particular pagan deity in Canaan, but the way he used the word Moloch in a set of essays, a Molochian system of perverse incentives, where the very incentive structure of the system is built on rivalrous conflict governed by win-lose metrics. And Barbara Marx Hubbard, my dear evolutionary partner, spent her life talking about that. And that created a fragility, right? We don't have systems that are resilient. We have systems that are short-term efficient with short-term perverse incentives, which create systems that are fragile, that are complicated and break down in fundamental ways. And that breakdown at the very core of everything is what allows us to have an AI race, a weapons race in AI, which is what we're experiencing right now, literally an arms race in AI, even though we have an enormous amount of people who are at the leading edge of the field saying that the arms race could destroy us. We can't figure out how to create a shared story of value between us. So we can't create trust between us because trust is based on value. And my friend Yuval Harari keeps screaming, oh my God, people don't trust each other. They trust AI. They shouldn't trust AI. We should trust each other. And then in his very next sentence, he says, oh, but there's no shared stories of value because all stories are made up and all stories are fiction and all value is fiction. So trust each other anyways. Why would we trust each other? We trust each other because we experience in our body, heart, minds shared value. Because the same value moves through us, right? We're part of a same story of value. And that which unites us, right? That value that lives and breathes in us is so much greater than that which divides us. So we're here to tell a new story of value. We're here to become Homo Amor. There's someone that we must become. Does that make sense? And who must we become? So who we must become is the new human and the new humanity. And that is what we're here for. So our job is not to, although I've promised everyone an episode on Israel in the fall, and I will do that. There's an enormous amount to be said, and I'm ripped apart every day by Gaza and Israel and the whole thing. And we will do that. I promise that, and we will do that. But that's not, and that needs to be done, and that's related to the meta crisis. But that's not what ours, and we need to talk about the Ukraine and Russia, and Elena's promised me, right, an update, and we need to absolutely talk about that. And we need to talk about immigration, which we did right before Trump got elected. So we will talk about things happening in the world because we need to. But at the core of what we're doing is we want to address the systemic Molochian field of perverse incentives that emerge from a breakdown in self-understanding. Right? We don't understand who we are. We don't know who we are, literally. So we're at this moment like they were in Florence in the Renaissance, which we call, Zach and I, a time between worlds. We call it a time between stories. And in that time between worlds and time between stories, as Black Death was sweeping Europe, there was a realization that to respond to suffering, we need to actually incarnate the evolutionary impulse and create and disclose and press inwards and generate new gnosis about who am I and who are we and where am I and where are we and what am I and what I ought be doing. And that is the single most precious thing that could have been done in Florence, and it birthed, to the extent that they got the plot lines right, it birthed the great dignities of modernity, what Habermas calls the great dignities of modernity. And to the extent they got the plot lines wrong, they kind of skipped value, and they said it was kind of self-evident, and they skipped, right, an entire set of issues, right, a narrative of desire. What does desire mean? And they skipped a kind of a narrative of power, right? They got a bunch of plot lines right, and they evolved the instantiation of value in the world. For the first time in history, slavery was, at least for a period of time, abolished, and universal human rights, right, stepped into the mainstream, the center of gravity of culture in a way that it never had, and the feminine emerged, right, the true feminine, right, the emergence of the power of the feminine, and the dignity of the masculine evolved in fundamental ways. Men were no longer disposable for wars. There was a dignity. There's not just a divine feminine, there's a divine masculine. Like, right, so all of this emerged, all of this possibility, this emergence of universal human rights and feminism, and and obviously the scientific method at the core of it, and new understandings of mathematics, and new forms of poetry and literature and art, right? And new understandings of the personal, and new understandings of sexuality, and new understandings of potential structures of governance, and new forms of understanding how we care for the elderly and how we take care of our children. All of that emerged. But then, and those were the dignities of modernity, but then, because the actual underlying plot lines of value, right, of Eros, of a shared story of value, right, none of that was handled. They just they took a quick loan out of social capital, spiritual capital from pre-modernity. They said, let's just assume value is real. Let's not get into that. Let's just call that self-evident. But then that caught up with us, and the system crashed, right? That we didn't have an innate story of value. So the story became a success story. It became a rivalrous conflict governed by win-lose metrics story, right? The image of man became the successful man, the successful woman, right? We became Homo sapien, right? Filled with information, but with very little wisdom. And information is not wisdom. There's lots of information. There's a tiny amount of wisdom. For all the information we have, there's a tiny subset of information that's actually truth, right? Because truth is hard. Truth is expensive. Truth is painful. Truth requires effort. Right? Misinformation, disinformation is easy. It's easy to spread a lie. A lie moves across the world virally 12 times faster than truth can possibly move. So, wow. So we got to this place of the meta crisis. We got to this place of the potential collapse of humanity. We got to this place of, right, a moment where the future generations cannot be born. Right, where it's not a given that the trillions of future human beings that could be born, that could love, that could make love, that could create, that could be kind, that could be noble, right, that could be filled with goodness, truth, and beauty, it's no longer a given in any sense, shape, or form that they're going to be born. So we have the cries of trillions of people calling out to us, to this generation, in this moment, in this time, right? And sometimes I'm kind of shocked, and there's so few people paying attention. And everybody's kind of, right, and even the people who are supposed to be paying attention, kind of caught up in their own story, their own, I got wounded here, I got traumatized there, what am I going to do? Yes, take care of your wounds and trauma, and then pay attention to what's happening. Take care of your wounds and trauma now, work on them, now bracket them, now let's do this together, let's roll this boulder up a hill together, let's come together, let go of the egoic plays, let go of the obsessions, let's come together, right? We've got trillions of people calling us from the future. We have the entire, right, 10 billion, going towards 10 billion in the present. We've got all of the past that's handed the baton to us. It's on us. We are that generation. There's never been that generation before. That's actually true. There's never been a time between worlds and time between stories in which we could actually collapse and lose the whole thing at this moment of global civilization that hasn't solved any of the previous local civilization problems, with exponential technologies that have the ability, the capacity to end the whole thing, now available not just to state actors, but to rogue players right across the globe, right, with no orienting North Star of, right, a story of value that would actually bind us, right, in a larger superorganism of Eros and meaning and love. That's what we're here for. Does that make sense, everybody? That is what we're here for. Who's got this? Who's got this? This is what we're here for. This is what we're doing. We're not, does everyone get that, right? That this is what we're here for. This is what we're here to do. That's our clarity. Our clarity is, right? And our clarity is we're here to birth Homo Amor. We're here to become Homo Amor. And within that context of birthing Homo Amor and becoming Homo Amor, we're going to talk about the dignity of desire. We're going to talk about the future of relationships. We're going to talk about who am I, the 4 selves. We're going to talk about the 7 levels of Eros. We're going to talk about pleasure as ethics and pleasure as policy, right? We're going to talk about Homo armor to Homo Amor, right? We're going to talk about, right? That's what we're here to do. We're here to literally give the best answer that can be given based on the deepest insights of validated gnosis from all the streams of wisdom, premodern, modern, and postmodern, synergized into one shared story of value, which shows us that value is cosmic, it's structural, that cosmic structural value lives in us. One of our key projects this year, we need to show how every value lives all the way down. Uniqueness, where does uniqueness start, right, in Cosmos, before you get to unique self, right? My Unique Self Institute friends, Claire Molinare, David, right? Where does uniqueness start? Where does it start? Right? In other words, we just heard Krista and Christina Amelon, 2 unique selves. But how did we get to those unique selves? We didn't start with Christina Amelon and Krista. Those are unique selves in human incarnated person. That's not where uniqueness started. Uniqueness started all the way down. Where did uniqueness start the first time? Probably the first pressure waves, actually. So argues my friend Howard Bloom. So we have to do a history of uniqueness. There's a history of uniqueness. There's a history of transformation. There's a history of fairness. But fairness is a human word. Where did fairness start much earlier on? Lena, harmony. Right? Does everyone get that? In other words, we have to actually we have to tell this story and actually articulate a vision of what we've called here an evolving parentalism, a shared story of value that actually all over the United States and all over China and all over Bulgaria and all over Gaza and all over all of the fundamentalist worlds and all over the Western democratic worlds and all over the totalitarian worlds, there's actually this recognition of something that cuts through. There's a cut through. Daniel Dennett wrote about, Darwin's idea. He wrote about the acid of Darwin's idea that cut through culture. We need an acid that actually cuts through, that's so powerful, it's so potent, that's so compelling. It's not a bestseller book. It's not about, we did a bestseller book. That's not a success. We need to do almost a new Bible, if you will. A new Bible of an evolving parentalism with the best list of first principles and first values, with a story about how each first principle and first value evolves across space and time, and then how it applies and how it changes policy. That's not easy, but that's doable. That's what we're doing. Okay? That's what we're doing. Does everyone get that? Does everyone get that? Wow. That was just a way of saying hello. I just wanted to say hello. Hi. That's what we're doing. That's our clarity. That's our clarity. So within the context of that clarity, we do One Mountain. Does that make sense, everybody? That's why we do One Mountain. We do One Mountain because what we do is we realize that we can't tell the new story of value, right? I was at Oxford, Zach was at Harvard, right? You can't tell a new story of value from Harvard and Oxford, right? Harvard is now one of the great woke institutions in the country, right? As is Oxford, but that's not the reason you can't tell the new story of value from there. You can't tell the new story of value from there because there's not a living, alive community. There's not a unique self symphony of stunning, beautiful people with open hearts whose full passion and whose full yearning, right, actually feels the whole. We can only write this new story of value, not from an academic institution, not even from our think tank, the Center for World Philosophy and Religion. The Center for World Philosophy and Religion needed to give birth And I was delighted together with Barbara Marx Hubbard to start together with all of you, One Mountain, Many Paths. We needed to give birth to this new vision. We call it now Who We Must Become, One Mountain, Many Paths, this place where we get together every week. We've done it now for over 450 weeks. That's a little crazy, right? Right? How many weeks have we done this for? 459 weeks, right? We've gotten together every week. We haven't missed a week, right? And we've tried to look at a new dimension of the new story of value and talk about it together. We talk about it between us, in the space between us, and we love each other, and we honor each other, and we are profoundly honoring of each individual and the individuation of each person and the gifts of each person. But this is not a talent show, right? This is, we all are moving what we can to move this rock up this hill. And some of us are showing up and just resourcing the center by being members of One Mountain and pouring our heart energy in, which is stunning and beautiful and gorgeous and enormous. Other people are editing. Other people are researching, right? Other people are teaching unique self. Other people are doing study groups, right? Other people are having Saturday night parties and doing kind of deep leadership training and study and structure and calibrating and moving energy through the system. Right? But everyone is at play, right? We are a system which is anti-guru in every possible way. At the center of our system is the Dharma, right? Is the gnosis itself, and is our love, the love that lives between us. Does that make sense? So we're a unique self-symphony. We each have a unique instrument to play in the symphony. Our instruments are different, right? And we all come from a different place and a different time, but we bracket our egoic self. We bracket our egoic kind of talent show self, which is what the separate self does. How will I shine at a talent show? And we look for what's my unique contribution, right? To play my unique instrument, right? In this unique self symphony, right? And the musical score of the symphony is the Dharma. Is the new gnosis. And the new gnosis is alive, right? Ideas are alive, right? Lena, ideas are alive, but not alive in the sense that an idea written on paper is alive, but intimacy itself is alive, as we've talked. And so every week we come together in this space of this unique self-symphony, and I try and share an idea. And then different ones of us take it and we write it, we study it, people challenge it. People might take it into their own practice, into their own teaching, right? We discuss it. Right? We create oral essay books, Rudolf Steiner. Who knows Rudolf Steiner? Right? Who knows? Anyone know Rudolf Steiner? Right? Right? Who knows Rudolf Steiner? Right? Rudolf Steiner is awesome. So Rudolf Steiner wrote like 85 books. Rudolf Steiner really kind of ushered in much of kind of the world of kind of maybe the human potential movement, some of the best thought in the world that's taken us in part in the right direction. So Steiner wrote, I think, 2-3 books. Most of the books were written with colleagues and friends of his who took transcripts, stenographs of talks, and that became kind of Steiner's great library. So we're creating this great library of oral essays. We're creating this great library of David J. Temple books, which I'm writing together with Zach and Ken. But there are serious, kick-ass, powerful, potent partners, right, all through the center. And we're each doing something unique and something different. And we're shining together. We're actually creating the new story of value. That's what we're doing. And we're committed to download it into the source code of consciousness and culture. So that's the context for this week. Okay, and I know that and I apologize for it with some degree of sincerity and some degree of insincerity, but I apologize for it. And I mean that just in a teasing way. But the reason it's so important to reset who we are, because it's very easy to lose the thread. Theseus goes and he slays the Minotaur, right, in that great Greek legend, and then he can't find his way out. And Ariadne, right, the daughter of the king, right, leaves a thread that he has to find his way through the labyrinth. Right? Sometimes we get so involved in our projects and our heroes and slaying the dragon, we forget the thread, right? The plot line. What's the plot line? We're here to tell the new story of value. And there's no dogma here. There's Dharma. I mean, it's the best, deepest, validated insights and gnosis that we can live in our bodies, right? That we know their truth, right? As they breathe and pulse in our blood and they're intellectually compelling and emotionally, right, resonant, and they can move across the world, across space and time, and we sharpen them and we deepen them and they evolve, and then we emerge with this unimaginable possibility. And the assumption has been this is not possible. It is. It's what we're doing. So within that context, I'm ecstatic to turn to David to read our code. And let's talk about this week. Cha.
Thank you, Dr. Mark. It's so good to be back reading codes. But yeah, it's so great to be able to reset our intention, to open up the context every week. It's almost like dharmic exercise, strength training, because every week, every Monday, kind of it goes back and it fixates on the day-to-day things and kind of ignores larger pieces of the puzzle. And then we come back on Sundays and it opens back up again and it energizes and moves us all forward. It moves me forward. So thank you, Dr. Mark. So this week's evolutionary love code really up-levels the understanding of Tantra, and it creates a distinction and weaves it into a larger whole for us. So here's this week's evolutionary love code. What is Tantra? There's the old Tantra from the old interior sciences and the new Tantra, which integrates the leading edges of the interior and exterior sciences and tells a new story of value. The great realization of the new Tantra is Homo, Amor. The 4 principles of Tantra, old and new, validated across the leading edges of the interior and exterior sciences of all the great traditions, premodern, modern, and postmodern, are 4. The principle of non-rejection, trace everything back to its source, reality is a trickster, opposites are joined at the hip. And I guess the Garden of Eden is paradise, and paradise is paradox. I believe that's 5 principles. But thank you, Dr. Mark. Back to you.
Opposites joined at the hip and paradise paradox, and we'll make that 1. That's all part of the same.
Okay, got it. Okay,
so, there we go.
4 principles. All right, thanks, Dr. Mark.
Okay, fantastic. Okay. So we're going to do a mini course. I will leave it to Eli and Krista to share the details probably next week. But we're going to be doing a full kind of year-long course starting in September. We're probably going to do a kind of introductory 3-week mini course on the nature of Tantra. So I won't get through all of this, but I want to at least give you one new piece today. And in that 3-week course, we'll kind of open it up, and it's going to lead into our kind of year-long study. And over the summer, we're going to create a kind of a faculty of a whole bunch of people to be kind of on the faculty of the course, as it were. And it'll be the study we do this year. And we're literally in the process now of trying to figure out what the content is, right, for that course, right? Is it, and there's a couple of choices, but the essence of the course is becoming Homo, Amor. But there's going to be a specific set of contents. And really just now we're deeply working on that. And we want to really this year, really deepen the community in some kind of deep and profound way. Okay. These 4 principles of Tantra, right? Which actually I believe reweaves what we mean by Tantra. Tantra is so misunderstood. My great friend Sally Kempton was a great Tantric practitioner and great teacher and embodiment. I think she's maybe the greatest feminine embodiment of tantric thought, to my mind, in this generation in North America. And there's some good tantric scholars doing really good work, and there's a whole array of teachers. And bless all of that. Bless all the good work. But I want to talk not about the old Tantra, right? Not about, okay, I'm gonna read the 6th century, 8th century, 12th century, 14th century Tantra and become a wonderful reader of it, although we should do that. We need the ancient traditions, but the ancient traditions got a lot right and they got a lot wrong. And that's important. That's one of the realizations of cosmoerotic humanism, that the lineages got shit wrong, right? Modernity wasn't wrong about that. When Voltaire said, remember the cruelties, as the clarion call for modernity, he wasn't confused. There were great cruelties, and Hinduism, one of the great sources of Tantra, was filled with cruelties, right? There are Christianity, right? Birthed the Catholic Church, right? Which has unimaginable wonder and beauty and is also in many ways one of the great corrupt institutions for much of its history. One of those corrupt and decadent institutions, right? Chinese forms of Buddhism, in particular parts of China, were often armed garrisons, right, for hire at their worst. Right? Clearly, right? There are texts in Jewish sources, right, which need to be clearly repudiated, right, in a clear and direct way. So the fact that a great tradition said something doesn't make it right. That's clear, right? So one can't say, but this is what the tantric master said. No, right? Or this is what no, we have to actually create a new lineage, a new world religion, which brings together the deepest validated insights of the interior sciences, but also is able to discern between those validated insights and between their massive fuck up, their massive mistakes, which were serious and real. Does that make sense? Now, when we talk about Tantra here, I don't mean Hindu Tantra or Buddhist Tantra, okay? I don't mean Hindu Tantra, I don't mean Buddhist Tantra. I mean Tantra as a structure of thought across all traditions. There's what I've called for many, many years, when I was 20, whatever it was. At some point, I started talking about Kabbalistic Tantra, and I made a set of recordings called The Erotic and the Holy on Kabbalistic Tantra. So I'm talking about Tantra, right, as this structure of thought that moves across all the great traditions. And we're making this big claim. And if I had decided to become just purely a scholar, I would spend my life writing about this, 10 major academic books on this. And for whatever reason, I don't think that's the purpose of my particular life. So sometimes I'll work something out, draw it, integrate it, and then it needs many, many scholars to kind of unpack it. So what we're saying here is huge. It's like you can hear this and you're like, oh, we can almost not understand what we just did. What we just did is so understand what we're doing. We're actually doing a kind of review. I'm trying to do a kind of review that I've done over the last, 40 years. Okay, I'm, by the way, 93, right? I look well preserved, but I've spent about, is that accurate? That's not at once. Yeah, about 40 years on this, where I've tried to draw together what are the shared underlying tantric principles. And we've come up with these 4 principles that David read, beautifully. Okay. And in this 3-week course, we're going to talk about all 4 of them. So last week we focused on the principle of non-rejection. And I want to focus on a second one this week. So the principle I want to focus on this week is reality is a trickster. Okay, reality is a trickster. It's the third principle. We did the principle of non-rejection last week, and this is reality is a trickster. So maybe before we enter the principle, let me establish a rule. And here's the rule. Tantra means I'm in the currency of Eros of Cosmos. So there's a currency of Eros, right? Eros is the movement in reality. It's a core movement in reality, the movement of reality towards ever greater contact. And that movement of reality is animated by desire. There's a desire for ever greater contact. The feeling of desire for ever greater contact is aliveness, radical aliveness. And ever greater contact generates in its wake ever greater wholeness and ever more value. That's the core of Tantra. Right? Tantra means that reality is animated, and notice, none of this, you're not going to find this in Kashmir Shaivism and Abhinavagupta exactly, although you'll find pieces of it. You're not going to find it exactly in the Solomon lineage, although you'll find pieces of it. And you're not going to find it exactly in Buddhist Tantra, although you'll find pieces of it. And you're not going to find it in Mary Magdalene Tantra, although you'll find pieces of it. But you'll also find pieces in complexity theory and chaos theory. And you'll also find pieces in molecular chemistry. And you'll also find pieces in evolutionary biology. And you'll also find pieces in systems theory. So we're weaving it together. We're saying Tantra is a universe story before it's anything. Tantra is addressing the question of where are we? And then Tantra says, now that we know where we are, the who participates in the where. That's a core principle of Tantra. And that's who I am is I don't live in it, it lives in me. Major Tantric principle. I don't just live in, anyone finish the sentence for me. I don't just live in an intimate universe. The intimate universe lives in me, right? The who participates in the where. Does that make sense? So Tantra first says, where am I? Where are we? Right? And now that I know where I am and where we are, now I know, okay, who am I? Who are we? So we live in a Tantric universe, and the Tantric universe is a universe animated by Eros Valley. There's a currency of Eros. Now, the nature of that currency of Eros is conversation. Do you get that? It's like such a crazy deep idea, right? And as we live in a world in which there's a storied cosmos, and the story is animated by conversation. That's the nature of reality. And its story is not a human contrivance. And Aristotle did a good job in the Poetics trying to explain to people trying to write a tragedy in his era, how do you write a compelling tragedy? How do you write a compelling play? And he tried to understand the elements of a great story, but he couldn't quite get to, although it's implicit, the ontology of story. And a story is structural to reality. There is no difference between the way I experience a great story and the objective structure of story and reality. And again, if you read Aristotle's Poetics, it's implicit a little bit, but not clear. We're saying something, let's go to the next step. Story is reality. Reality is story. Reality is narrative. Right? And I've talked a lot about that over the last 2 decades, about how science talks about the facts of reality, but refuses the notion of story. Science doesn't dignify reality as being a story, although it could. And that science should participate in that story. But science, understandably, right, says, no, I don't want a storyline. That's going to confuse me. Science says, no, science starts with its beautiful doctrine of ignorance. Science says, I don't know any stories. And science correctly threw out all the medieval stories, right, which basically claimed to understand why everything was doing what it was doing. Science says, no, let's start with the declaration of ignorance, which is a beautiful thing for science to do. Let's figure out how things work. So science is asking that kind of how question, that mechanical question. But of course, science needs to be integrated into the story. But science is not telling a narrative story. If you do narrative in science, then the dogmas of scientism throw you out. Right? Science needs to be expanded, right, from mechanics to music. That's what Nietzsche understood and wrote about so beautifully. And religion is not telling a story which dignifies fully the story of my life in this reality. Religion is saying this reality is a hallway to the next world. This reality is a simulation. Now, this reality is a simulation in part, but it's dignified, right? And the narrative arc of my story in this reality matters. We have to give it full dignity. We can't kind of escape to the next world and use it to justify acting in a heinous way in this world. We can't slaughter people for the sake of Christ. We can't obsess, right, and try and destroy people and then say, oh, well, in the next world, we're all going to love each other. And it doesn't work that way, right? And there's a dignity, right, to my action in this world, right? And that there's a dignity to the storyline. So that notion of stories, that's cosmorotic humanism. Cosmorotic humanism says, right, reality is a narrative arc. And we've spent quite a bit of time, I'm not going to do it now, showing the 10 elements of story. that exist all the way down and all the way up the evolutionary chain. So story is the nature of reality, and story is made up of conversations. The plot line of the story is Eros value. Right? Whether it's subatomic particles coming together to form an atom, you've heard me say that about 1 billion times, but that's a plot line. Right? They're moving towards greater intimacy that creates a greater whole. That's the plot line. Deeper contact, radical aliveness, greater wholeness, more value. Okay? Now, the subatomic particles are paying attention to each other. That's what I was talking to Jim Rudd about, the complexity scientist with Zach. We're talking about this notion of attention all the way down. And Jim's like, that's crazy. That's like you're just making that shit up. Until we actually got to what we meant by attention. And we actually saw, oh, if you really understand attention in a rudimentary way and you formulate an equation around attention, this great complexity science said, oh, okay, if we understand attention in that way, we can actually see that attention moves all the way up and all the way down. And of course, there's a continuity of what we mean by attention, and there's a discontinuity. Us paying attention to each other is a different interior experience than dogs paying attention to each other, which is a different interior experience than amoeba paying attention to each other, which is a different interior experience than subatomic particles paying attention to each other. But the quality of attention moves all through cosmos, and the quality of conversation moves all through cosmos. And conversation means, what is it? What is a conversation? Conversation means, let's stay really close. This is crazy beautiful, okay? Conversation means there's an experience of first person, a proto-experience of aliveness, right? Even though I can't talk about it, I can't articulate it, I can't write a poem about it, but there's some proto-experience of first person. But not first person in, right, I am Kirsten. It's not that. When Richard Feynman, the physicist, talks about first person all the way down, he doesn't mean, right? Richard Feynman wrote these incredibly beautiful letters to his wife after she passed. It doesn't mean that a subatomic particle writes to another subatomic particle, right? After they've broken up. That obviously that's not what it means. It means there's a sense of aliveness, though. There's a first person, a fragrance, a proto pinprick, barely there. And then first person evolves. Second person means there's a space in between. There's you and me. Right? The space in between the electron and the proton neutron, between the molecules, between the macromolecules, between the autocatalytic cycles of macromolecules that then intensify and generate, right? The second Big Bang, a cell. There's a space in between that second person. And then third person means there's information exchanged. Information, meaningful information. Information means meaning, code, meaning, depth, interiority. Right? There's unique quality, unique information that's exchanged. Right? And information is a third person term. The second person of information would be meaning. The first person might be value, information, meaning, value. Right? But let's look at it now in third person, right? There's information exchanged. Okay? So a conversation means first persons, there's two first persons, there's two distinct parts, two distinct first persons. They have a second person space between them. And that space between them, they exchange information. And that exchange of information generates something new. That's conversation. That's actually what a conversation is. A conversation is an expression of contact between first persons in second person space. Two first persons create a second person space, which they exchange third person information, which generates something new. Huh? That's pretty rad. That's pretty exciting. That's pretty crazy. Okay? So conversation is the nature of cosmos. And now the evolution of cosmos in Tantra is the evolution of conversation. Does that make sense? The evolution of reality, which is the evolution of love, is the evolution of conversation. So Taylor, follow this with me, okay? Dr. Kincaid. We're in this together, right? Dr. Kincaid and I are thinking about this, right? Let's think about this deeply. Shahati, let's think about this, okay? David and Claire, Unique Self-Institute, let's think about this. Kathy, let's think about this. The evolution of conversation means our conversation deepens. The more we move through higher and higher levels of emergence, more and more depth, the more we get to the human level, right? The self-reflective human mind, the third Big Bang, and then we go through all the levels of human emergence. There's more and deeper and wider conversations. So to be Homo Amor, to be a tantric practitioner is to become Messiah. Right? That's what the Solomon lineage says. Homo Amor is komat Mashiach, is the stature of Messiah. And the word Messiah, Mashiach, in the original Hebrew is siach, conversation. The word Messiah literally means conversation. So Homo Amor is the one who doesn't leave the conversation. Other than when it's the rare conversation that should be left, right? So, right, I'm not going to negotiate with Hitler. Okay, I understand that. I understand that we don't negotiate with raw evil. But let's be careful, right? That's rare. Basically, we stay in the conversation. We evolve the conversation. We deepen the conversation. We keep in touch, right? In other words, right, we don't talk to each other in comment threads. That's a pseudo conversation. We talk to each other. There's no one in the world I'm not willing to sit. There's no one that's ever been in my life that I'm not willing to sit and talk through anything with. At any point in my life, no one. I wouldn't sit for a day. Wow, we have a disagreement, we have a conflict. Let's sit, let's work it out. Let's check information. Let's feel each other. Let's check each other's perspectives, right? Let's be in conversation, right? When the conversation stops, we stay, right? When we stop staying, when we turn away, the conversation stops. The two cherubs in the ark above the two cherubs above the ark in the Holy of Holies of the Jerusalem temple, right? They face each other. When they turn and face each other, blessing flows in the land. The text writes, when they turn away from each other, when the conversation stops, blessing stops to flow, right? It's like, wow. So we never stop the conversation. It's deep. So I want to go into this just for a second, okay? You know, a young friend of mine, Yehu Shalem, just wrote a song called Love and Fear. And it's a beautiful song about love and fear taking a walk together, right? And fear says, I'm afraid of heartbreak. So I'm afraid to love. And love says, oh my God, break my heart open so I can love more. That's deep, right? We think that there are these two opposites, if you will. And this is kind of 3 and 4 of the Tantric principles. One is I'm delighted, I'm in love, I'm ecstatic, right? My heart is full and overflowing. That's the desired state. That's love. What I'm afraid of is heartbreak. My heart's going to be broken. And if my heart's broken, then I'm devastated. I'm hurt, right? I can't find myself. Right? I can't open my heart again. I become bitter, right? I become angry, right? I become devastated. I become sometimes vicious or mean. I step out of the conversation. No, but that's deep. That's non-tantric. To step out of the conversation when my heart's broken is non-tantric. When my heart's broken, I realize there's nothing more whole than a broken heart. As my teacher wrote, Ein shalem milev shavur. There's nothing more whole than a broken heart. When my heart breaks, I'm devastated, but I don't then break down into bitterness. I break open into new possibility. If I've prayed for anything over the last 25 years, it's to not become bitter, to not let betrayal make me bitter, to not let hurt make me bitter. And on the other hand, let me feel the hurt and not deny it. Let me not bypass it. But let me not avoid dance around it, but let me walk through the hurt. Let me walk through the shadow of the valley of death and come out more whole. That's what Christ knew how to do. He knew how to love Judas even after Judas was Judas, right? And the Christ lives in all of us. Christ is not some guru God. Christ, we are all Christed. And we're all betrayed. And you can only be betrayed by someone who would never betray you. That's the nature of betrayal. Does that make sense, everybody? You can only be betrayed by someone who would never betray you, right? And when we're betrayed, we're heartbroken. And we can only betray someone that we thought we would never betray. So what does it mean to actually embrace that heartbreak and heart ecstasy? Reality's a trickster are actually part of the same dance. You can't split between them. So now stay with me, okay? I want to go one step deeper. So I can only do that if I move from ordinary love to outrageous love. And and I started talking about outrageous love the first time, and I want to go just 5 more minutes, but it's deep, and I want to get this with you. It's crazy, and it's beautiful. I only started talking about outrageous love in 2012. I was at Sally Kempton's house, and we were doing Shahati. You remember? You were there. What was it? It was the circle, right?
Circle.
It was the Wowdy circle, right?
Yes.
And I was supposed to give a talk, and I got on, and I just couldn't find the words. It was 2012, and the experience of betrayal was so deep and so painful. And if I can just be personal for a second, I love deeply. And when you love deeply, it hurts deeply. And I couldn't talk. I literally couldn't talk. And I thought to myself in that moment, right, okay, it's done. I've got it. Teaching's done. There's nothing left to do. There's nothing left to do. And then these words just poured through, which were, we live in a world of outrageous pain. And the only response to outrageous pain is outrageous love. We live in a world of outrageous pain, and the only response to outrageous pain is outrageous love. And I don't remember the talk, and Sally, who would never do this, but actually took notes on the talk and shared them with me afterwards, and became the core of what we call the outrageous love dharma, the outrageous love story in cosmologic humanism. And so in that talk, we distinguished between outrageous love and ordinary love. In ordinary love, your love is aroused by the other person. So you see someone beautiful, you're like, wow, what a beautiful heart. What a beautiful mind, right? What beautiful eyes, right? What a beautiful sensibility, right? So you're moved by something or someone that's beautiful in some way, or true in some way, or good in some way. You're moved by their beauty, and you fall in love. And when I say fall in love, I don't mean romantically, although maybe also, but I don't mean romantically. I mean out, right? You fall in love. You're like, wow, right? And we fall in love, in many ways, right? With people, with a great artist, an artisan, a friend, a teacher, a partner, right? Christina is here in this town that we live in, and Dr. Kincaid, KK, walks in and falls in love with all the shopkeepers. They're all excited for her to come into their store because she just like sees them and they just open as she talks to them. Right. So we fall in love because we met something that was beautiful. So that's called, in the lineage of Solomon, that's called Ava Achar Habriya. That's the love after creation. That's the love that responds to an object. But by an object, I mean, as an object relations. In other words, I see a person, I fall in love, I'm blown away. That's ordinary love, and that's great. It's beautiful. But there's what's called also Ahava Lifnei Habriya. There's love before creation. And love before creation is outrageous love. So it's not responding to some dimension of the manifest world. It's who I am. I am love. That's who I am. I'm not falling in love. I'm lived as love. I am love. Love moves through me. So when I'm betrayed and my heart's broken open and I'm filled with heartbreak, I realize, no, those cracks in the vessel need to be filled with gold, as in that ancient Chinese method, whose name escapes me right now, right? What's it called? I think I wrote it down here.
Kintsugi.
Kintsugi, right? I fill with gold, right? The cracks. So I make the cracks part of the design, right? And my heart breaks along unique contours, and those unique contours, those cracks are now filled with gold, and in the shadow is the gold. wrote Jung, and I love deeper. So my heart's broken. It's broken and shattered into 1,000 pieces. But I don't become bitter. I become somehow better. I become somehow deeper. Right? My heart becomes more whole. My heart breaks open into new possibility. Right? Because my heart broke, the constriction and narrowness of my heart, right, no longer, right, constrains me. I can love bigger and I can love wider. And I can integrate my wildness and my power, right, into my care and my caution. And they kind of merge together and they create a new elixir. And I love in a whole different way. My heart breaks open. And so, Dr. Kincaid and I, Christine and I, Kik and I, we took this idea back in 2013, 14, and we created this dharma of outrageous love. And I write someone an outrageous love letter. What does it mean to write someone an outrageous love letter? And it means that I'm looking at you and you're crazy good. You're crazy beautiful. And I'm using beautiful in the Whiteheadian sense. Right. You're this kind of gorgeous paradox of opposites. You're this wild trickster person, right? And I'm blown away by your truth, by your goodness, by your beauty. But that then arouses in me my own essence, which is love, which is a unique configuration of Eros. I'm a unique configuration of Eros desire. I'm a unique configuration of Eros value. Eros means love. I'm a unique intimate configuration of the divine, of the infinite intimate. And you arouse that in me. In other words, your beauty, your goodness, your truth arouses in me my own essence, which is my unique configuration of love that you cause to come alive. So imagine it like this. Imagine that you, the person I'm looking at, you're this beautiful stone on the beach, and the sun is shining on the stone, right? And the sun makes the stone radiant. But it's not that the stone's radiant. It's the sun, right? The reason you're beautiful is because the Eros of reality configures and moves uniquely through you. But it's not, if you die, right? So often, if a person loves with ordinary love, if their partner dies, they die right afterwards. Because they've exiled all of the love in the universe to their partner. But that's not accurate. Your partner is holding uniquely, right, the Eros that's moving through all of reality, right? But if they disappear, then that love that they activated in you is still there, and you find it in a different way, and you activate it in a different way, but it's there. It's who you are, right? Your beloved, your circle of beloveds reminds you that you are love, that you are Eros value, that you're a unique configuration of Eros value. So when your heart breaks, even when you're betrayed, you don't become bitter. You don't start hating life, right? Life loves you even more in some way. And you become somehow, right? There's nothing more whole than a broken heart. Now, I don't wish anyone a broken heart, right? I don't wish anyone a broken heart, but is there anyone here who hasn't had their heart broken? My heart's been broken 1,000 times. It's like heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to have your heart broken, right? It just, and if you ever had your heart broken, you know that the feeling of your heart broken is this heavy feeling. You say, my heart's heavy. Who knows that phrase? Like, my heart's heavy. Who knows that? Anyone know that phrase? Like, I have a heavy heart. When your heart's broken, your heart's actually heavy. Your heart's literally heavy, right? And you literally feel your heart cracking apart. Like you can't breathe. And then you realize, no, it's not ordinary love that's moving through me. And I haven't exiled my love to that person. No. I'm not Homo Armor. I'm Homo Amor. Right? I am the Amorous Cosmos in person. That's who I am. And I may need to be fierce, but I'm always loving. I'm not lost in obsession. I'm lost in discernment. And the difference, the distinction, the tantric distinction that you can always find as true, it never fails, between the ordinary lover and the outrageous lover never leaves the conversation. The tantric master never leaves the conversation. Right? And when we're talking about friends, we're talking about beloveds, we're talking about people that we were close with, that we held, that we danced with, that we laughed with, that we cried with. We don't leave the conversation. We hold people in their wholeness. We hold people in their complexity. Reality is a trickster. We understand that people hurt us. Bono, we hurt each other and we do it again. We understand that people hurt us. I know the code. Right? We understand that people hurt us. right? But we turn that hurt into healing, right? We turn the insult, right? We turn the insult into the wounds of love. That's Tantra. Reality is a trickster, right? Reality is a trickster, right? The things are not as they seem. It looks like I'm heartbroken, but then at that moment when it looks like I'm heartbroken, that should be the most devastating moment. This sweetness comes in and something opens when I stay in, when I don't turn away, when I don't close my heart, I don't drink it away. I don't start having 4 drinks a night. I don't stop, being fully embodied and present, right? I step in. I might step in and just be silent for 15 minutes. I might step in by just chanting. I might step in by kind of, wow, I'm going to take a long walk and just clear my mind and let the love that I am arise in me. I have to practice. There has to be a praxis. It's not a mind trick. Right? It's not a Jedi mind trick. It's a praxis. But because it is my true nature, right, my heartbreak actually turns into my heart blown open. Right? That's the move, what we call the move from the tragic to the post-tragic. Does that make sense? That's the move from the tragic to the post-tragic. I don't throw people out of my heart. I don't leave the conversation. Right? Reality as a trickster means that at the moment in which, right, all of my wounds, because evil rests in the wound. Evil enters through the wound. And evil is the opposite of life. Evil is the conversation stops. The stopping of the conversation is always where evil starts. Polarization, all wars in the world are based on polarization. Polarization means conversation stopped. Even if people are actually technically talking to each other, they don't have a shared field of value. They're talking at each other. There's no real conversation. As long as I'm in conversation, there can't be evil. Does that make sense? Like, it's deep. It's deep. Don't ever write. And sometimes I can be sitting, right? Sometimes I can be married to someone and I've got 17 kids and we're talking all the time, but there's no conversation. Right? Conversation is surprising. I'm willing to be surprised. I'm willing to listen. I'm willing to bracket, to hear you, to feel you. We're intimate. I feel you. You feel me. Pshaw, right? Reality is a trickster. When it looks like it's all breaking down, it's the moment when it's all being birthed. We're in the season of a particular holiday. I'm going to end here. The holiday is called the 9th of Av in the Solomon lineage. And it's the day, can you hear me, friends? It's the day that the temple, the great Jerusalem temple, originally built by Solomon, was destroyed. For the second time, the Romans destroyed the temple. And the lineage says, on this day of fasting, this day of tragedy, but Tisha B'Av, on this day when the temple was destroyed, Nolad HaMashiach, the Messiah, was born. Messiah means conversation. And the day when the conversation seemed to end, the day the music died, the music started again. There's nothing more whole than a broken heart. And to be Homo, Amor, is I stay in the conversation. I become the personal face of the conversational cosmos. Right? And I don't distort the story. I listen deeply, right, to my experience of the story and your experience of the story. And we come up together with a shared story. That's what we're here to do, to create a shared story of value that lives and moves and breathes in all of us, that has room for everyone and has room for everything. No one's outside the circle. Reality is a trickster. So we've brought that principle of Tantra now onto the table, right? What a crazy, crazy honor and delight to be with you, to be talking together. Right, and that's why we never turn off the chat box. Right? Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Krista. Ciao.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Marc Gafni. Thank you all for staying in that beautiful, beautiful, wild ride. And let's give ourselves a moment to really breathe that in, really receive everything that we were given today, and maybe write something in the chat box, maybe a heart or a thank you or anything that is alive in you right now, so your voice can be heard in the symphony and we can kind of resonate together in this beautiful, beautiful Dharma that was shared today. Reality is a trickster. And we're actually becoming tantric practitioners here together as we speak. And I was thinking about a great meme that came across my phone once, that was about what does it mean to be a tantric practitioner. And then there were all these different images, and one of them was, you can imagine what it was. It was like, my friends think it's this, my family thinks it's this, but what it actually is is sitting here on Sunday nights studying with all of my friends from across the globe, and actually knowing and learning and practicing and embodying that I am participating in the conversation of the conversational cosmos, that I am the personal face of the conversational cosmos. And that is more exciting than anything. And then to know that that conversation, and that every conversation that that you, that we are going to have this week actually participates in the conversational cosmos and actually participate in the evolution of conversation. And that's how much it matters how we show up in every single moment in our lives. We don't need to be perfect, but it is a beautiful invitation that feels so empowering and so hopeful. So I wanted to close with actually asking ourselves the question, like, how can we bring this into our weeks this week? Maybe you can ask yourself that question. I'm asking myself that question. Like, what do I want to do with this week? It might be that you want to say, okay, I really want to listen to this replay again because there were so many gems that I know I've missed as I was listening. And I want to commit to actually studying this piece this week and taking the transcript and printing it out and taking my pen and making notes and really commit to studying this week. Or maybe you want to commit to writing someone an outrageous love letter, a beautiful practice that Marc alluded to today. Like, write an outrageous love letter. And as Marc always says, to write an outrageous love letter, we have to exaggerate until we are accurate. So it's really perceiving either someone or your pet animal, what do you call it, or a tree, or all of reality. You can write to anyone and anything your outrageous love letter. And it's a beautiful, beautiful practice to stay in that alignment, to remind yourself over and over and again, to really access that current of Eros that Marc was speaking about today, that current of outrageous love, and to step into that power again and again and again. So maybe your practice this week is writing an outrageous love letter. Maybe it's actually staying in conversation. Who do you need to have a deeper conversation with? Who do you need to actually deepen and deepen and deepen in that beautiful space with this week? So I want to encourage us all to bring it into our week, because we need to not only study Homo more, we need to become Homo more. We need to embody it. We need to live it. So let's do that together. And a beautiful way to practice is, of course, doing it together in our awesome Who We Must Become community platform. James is going to put a link in the chat box where you can actually sign up for one area of the platform completely for free. That way you can create a profile. You can create your bio there, tell us a little bit about who you are, what your story is, so we can see all the beautiful faces there together. We can communicate with each other. We can find each other there. And of course, if you're ready, please do sign up to become a member, because that is the way to resource our home and really lift this up to the next level together. And as a member, you get access to all the self-study courses, the bi-weekly courses where we're studying the book club together with Christina, David, and Jamie, studying the book Whole Mates, the relationship of the future. So there's many, many beautiful spaces to meet every day. We have daily prayer happening, evolutionary chanting. A group of us are chanting every day to tune into this current of Eros. So there's a lot happening there, and I would really, really love to meet you there and get to know each other and become a part of each other's story. So thank you for doing that, and I can't wait to meet you there on the inside.